Everybody, thank you for joining on behalf of NDCC for the webinar today. The topic for today's conversation is Policy for the People, Building a Black Agenda for the 21st Century. And this webinar really brings together thinkers and organizers to envision a bold Black agenda rooted in justice, equity, and community ownership. And we'll really explore policy priorities around housing, education, and really looking at economic empowerment throughout the community development lens. Apart from that, we have NDCC has a few projects going on. We have office space for lease at Ella Baker's Women's Business Center, 4115 Frederick Avenue in Baltimore. So if anyone's interested, I'll write my email in the chat and you can reach out to us. We also, in the fall, NDCC has the Co-opnomics Academy, which is a 10-week learning experience designed to move participants from understanding cooperative principles to really building real-world community-rooted enterprises. And people who are engaged will go through a curriculum exploring cooperative history, racial equity, enterprise design, democratic governance, financial literacy, and cooperative branding. And each session really emphasizes the practical application of the tools that the participants will need to sustain cooperative ventures grounded in the community. We have a DC version and then also a Baltimore one. And it's beginning September 17th. It convenes once a week from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Ella Baker's Women's Business Center. And it's an in-person setting, which really fosters collaboration, reflection, and really bringing like a hands-on development point of view on shared ownership and economic justice. So we'll be sharing the link with that as well once registration opens. But until then, if you're interested, please reach out to me. I'll add my NDCC's info and my info in the chat as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. Our moderator for today is Willard Lett. He is a cooperative organizer and advocate with extensive experience in community economic cooperation and reparative finance. He served on the boards of We Tuskegee Ubuntu Collective, Northeast Federation of Cooperatives, Us Lifting Us, and the Truth and Repair Commons, and is meal co-chair of the NACOBRA New England chapter. We have Nikaya Mujahid, who is an award-winning activist, scholar, writer, and educator. She founded a healing-centered organization in 2017 focused on spiritual and holistic wellness for Black and Indigenous communities, and currently serves as executive director at the Fair Budget Coalition, directing resources towards underserved and historically oppressed communities in DC. We have Jamila White, who is the founder at Blackwity. She's a liberationist and global community development practitioner, advocate whose work centers Black self-determination and collective power, a cooperative operator with over a decade of experience working across Africa and the Caribbean. And we have Monica Copeland, who is a project director at Third Space Action Lab, where she leads the People's Practice, a multi-strategy initiative to advance anti-racist practice and policy in community development sector. Monica has worked on financial inclusion and asset building for low and moderate income families. And with that, I'll hand over the conversation to Willard, our moderator for today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists and the participants who've joined us today. It's, I guess, appropriate that we would be addressing this issue of policy for the people, building a Black agenda for the 21st century. And, when we're talking about policy, I guess the thought that comes to mind is particularly policy grounded in electoral politics. How do we make that stuff happen? And so we're going to start out the discussion with a fairly general question, and I'll go around calling on each one of the panelists based on their position on my screen. And the first question we'll start with is, what are the most urgent policy issues currently impacting Black communities today? And we asked that question in the face of both internationally with Ghana making a statement at the UN declaring the transatlantic slave African chattel enslavement system the gravest crime against humanity. And then just the other day, the Supreme Court making a decision that profoundly impacted, Voting Rights Act. So we're presenting within that context and everything else that's going on in the world, we're asking the panelists, what are the most urgent policy issues currently impacting Black communities today? And Sister Copeland, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Willard. Hi, everybody. Good evening. So nice to be in your presence and be with you on this important topic. When I saw that question, I actually felt like I couldn't just call out one particular policy issue because I feel like so many things are intersectional and especially involving Black communities. And so the work that I do is on anti-racist community development. And we have a lot of different levers and a framework that applies to many different policies. I'm happy to share more about that. But what I would say is, too, is the reason why I'm not calling out one, the one issue that I would call out for myself is because I've made a career of it. I spent the last 20 years working on economic issues. And again, that to me is very intersectional. When I see the problems facing Black communities, that there's often a monetary component, scarcity, not having enough resources, and then probing deeper, saying like, why? Was there predatory lending? Was there some sort of policy that was put in place? Was there redlining? Like, what exactly happened and is continuing to happen? And so for me, the economic raises to a high level just because I've spent my career in asset building, financial inclusion, and that sort of thing. So when we're talking about like taxes and credit unions and co-ops, that's kind of like my sweet spot, banking, unbanked, that kind of thing. So happy to pass it, but just, again, these issues, again, if you don't have enough money, then it's sort of like you can't afford health care, you can't afford food, you can't afford to find a place to live, you're in danger of eviction, foreclosure, your credit scores. There's like many ways for me that I see the policy implications for finances.
Thank you. Thank you. Very insightful response. And as we look at our history, we see, the impact that our policy has had on our community in the economic arena with both the Freedmen's Bank after Reconstruction and the collapse of that bank, among other things. But I am going to um, ask the question again. What are the most urgent policy issues currently impacting Black communities today, in your opinion? And I'm going to ask Sister Jamila to share with us her thoughts.
Thank you, everyone. Peace and blessings. Y'all can, okay, I had a little internet thing. Peace and blessings. So I'm joining y'all on First Nation Anacostan tribe land in DC. And Monica is absolutely right. It's so many intersectional issues that are compounding us. I'll be real quick and focus on just a few in DC to be very specific. So DC is not a state. We do not have statehood. We have representation. We have taxation without representation, meaning that we are taxed at, I think, the highest tax rates in the nation for federal income taxes and other taxes. Yet we do not have any vote in what happens to us federally. So DC has often been used as a petri dish for some of the oppressive and racist ideas that have come out of this government, right? Since they colonized, Turtle Island, and so we in DC have experienced that. And DC, as many know, was historically majority Black. That population has changed. I call it the 3Ds: death, displacement, and detention, that has been used to drive many of Black Washingtonians out of the city. And one of the reasons it's able to happen at such a fast pace, and we're able to see some of the grossest inequities in the country. DC has one of the highest racial wealth gaps. White wealth is 81 times Black wealth in DC. DC is also one of the highest rates of Black homeowners. So you see the double-edged sword kind of right there with that wealth and poverty and those gaps. And so many more inequities that come from anti-Black racism and disinvestment, marginalization, and so forth. And so a lot of that has been fueled by the fact that DC does not have autonomy or governance over what actually happens throughout the entire city. And at any point in time, the local representation we have, such as the mayor, city council members, attorney general, that can be taken away, right? And right now, we have people within this federal administration and Congress who are actively working to try to take that away, right? And so for DC, protecting what we call home rule and trying to work for statehood is critical right now, given what's happening in this administration. I'll say other larger, and this gets into more of a constitutional question, so I know it could go open up a can of worms, but I do think that going on what Ghana said, enslavement absolutely was the grossest crime to ever hit humanity, and mass incarceration is another gross crime that is impacting Black people, and it would behoove I'd be remiss not to come on and talk about the allowance of mass incarceration and prison for profit. So that a part of the 13th Amendment about you can be free except if you are incarcerated, I think is one of the gravest crimes that's still impacting Black communities. And without the removal of that from the 13th Amendment, it will be very hard for us to have communities that are truly built around thriving because you have constitutionally a way to keep us as an underclass. So I hope that was it was kind of clear. I didn't actually look at the questions beforehand. Apologies, but I want to be transparent.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So I thought I heard you sort of saying that, particularly for DC, political representation is really an issue and very important. And now I'm going to turn to our sister
Nakaya.
Mujahid.
Nakaya, yeah. So thank you for acknowledging the land, Jamila. I am taking this call. I'm away on travel from DC and I'm in Chumash land, in Central California right now. Um, I think so the statehood is critically important, particularly for DC. I think what I'll add to that is international policy and immigration policy. When folks think about the immigration issue, the frame that has been painted for us through the media is a focus on non-Black Latinos. But I want to remind us that there was an image that came out during the Biden administration of Border Patrol riding on horses with whips, whipping folks at the border, and they were Haitians. They were Black, right? Some of the folks who are facing like the highest detention rates are Haitians, are folks from the Caribbean, are folks from West Africa. And the places that we're seeing folks trafficked to once they're detained by ICE because they're engaging in human trafficking is abroad to the continent. So, and I think another thing that's really important about international policy. So, Jamila, as you were talking about the statehood issue, it reminded me that DC is unique on our landmass in that way, but we're also in the same situation as the Marshall Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, even. And the way that our international policy is done here prevents us from building global solidarity and seeing our struggle as the same third world struggle that is being engaged or waged because of the United States imperialism across the globe. And so, because we're in the seat of empire as Black folks who have been colonized and kidnapped and trafficked here, and, for those of us who are also indigenous, like for folks who have been, experienced genocide and all the things that have kept us bound in this failing project of the United States empire, we struggle to see ourselves again as connected to other movements and third world struggles sometimes fail to connect their struggles to ours because we're in the seat of empire, right? Um, so I think that's what I'll add, international immigration policy.
Interesting, interesting. Thank you for providing that context. And with DC being sort of the testing ground for a lot of policies, one, I want to thank you for acknowledging DC in particular, but the existence of an internal colony within the U.S. and, connecting it to all the other colonies that the U.S. maintains. And, two, the one of the ways that DC leads has led the nation in terms of being a testing ground is reparations. Unfortunately, the reparations that DC, the district gave were to the enslavers, not to the enslaved. And we're seeing a very sort of similar kind of thing here. So, great responses. We talked about economics. We talked about politics, and we talked about the, making the international connection. So I'm going to ask the next question and cycle through. And I am going to start with our sister Monica. Sister, what lessons can we learn from past Black political movements? When we're doing this work and looking at building power and
Mhm.
building policy for today in our community.
Yes. So that one, I think we can't help, especially in the Black community, to refer back to, for example, the civil rights movement, as one of the movements that kind of like we look back to for lessons learned. And in particular, it was coming up for me in January of 25 when they had all those executive orders, and people were like, "Oh, they're rolling back DEI." They're, taking things out. People are like wiping their websites, and there's like kind of a little bit of panic through a lot of the nonprofit sector, government sector funding being removed, and just seeing that play out. A lot of people were like, "This has happened before." And so, like you take look back when, like, the end of the Civil War, and there were gains, and then they were taken away, right away with like the black senators, and people had power for like a very brief moment. And so people, you look towards like the post George Floyd moment where, the same thing is like people thought, oh, it's, DEI and everything, like all the kind of like proclamations of like support. And then the retraction basically and retrenchment that we've been in. But if you look at these things, it's like people say, you take those steps forward and you take them back, but you have to kind of keep with your pace in terms of your fighting stance. And so a lot of times, people are like, don't get discouraged. Like we've been here before. We've been, in some cases through worse. And so I think a lot of people look to those lessons and look to their stories of their ancestors to kind of like, kind of bolster themselves through some tough times. And so I think I also think too when people have been through like financial recessions as well, people have the lessons learned of bouncing back in those moments too. So it's like when people were saying COVID and all the implications that were happening, like in terms of losses and businesses closing and things like that, and people were like, "Oh, I've lived," especially if you look to older generations, they've like, "I've lived through 5 recessions," and we come back out on, we persevere, we weather the storm, and so I would just point to the civil rights movement as one of the main ones.
Okay, great. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to get deeper into this. Sister Jamila, what are the lessons learned from past Black political movements when we think about building policy today?
I love that Monica goes back in history, because I also teach Black history to adjunct. So, remembering that we have been in times like this, from Reconstruction and how that led to, Jim and Jane Crow racial apartheid in America that still exists today, but really, legalized for another 100 years. And then seeing what happened, like to this next iteration. And so, I definitely want to credit the Black Power movements, and I consider the civil rights within those Black Power movements. And the one thing I want to say, like, just about that era is that the years leading up to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 65 Voting Rights Act were some of the most violent in the Black Power movement, right? The bombing of four beautiful babies at a place of worship, right, was right before leading up to the assassination of Medgar Evers, assassination of Malcolm X, was all leading up into those years before we saw this precipice happen. So I am inspired, and it's hard because I do definitely get pessimistic and upset and angry and all of the different emotions sometimes when I think about what is happening right now in this country that is more elevated. I'm not going to deny that we've been under oppression since the day Black people were forced by Europeans to come onto this country. However, we see the intensification, and it reminds me of right before we were on catalytic change, were the most violent, were some of the most violent, where all of a sudden you saw things happening. It's like, what's happening at the same time? But you also saw Black people. And I want to credit all Black people, because we saw Black people that were domestic, Black workers who for a year walked to work, right? Who lost their jobs, who took those pay cuts, who didn't have any opportunities. We saw Black folks from all different types of economic and social status be a part of these movements in some different ways. And we saw different types of movements, right? That worked, that built off of each other, that learned from each other, that were interfaith, right? That continued too. And I think that we saw some of the later movements towards the later 60s after those bills were passed start to change, like the People's Party and the Black Panther Party that came up after both of those rights acts were changed. And so I say that to say, for us, remembering if history serves us any truth, that the two biggest kind of moments in U.S. This project called the United States was the war for freedom against England, then the American Revolution, Civil War, because the Civil War was really the Revolution War, right? That was a way to really change this country. And then was the ending of legalized racial apartheid. And like this country went to war to keep enslavement, legal enslavement. That was the most violent act, as a mass that the country had done. So I think if anything understands that we are on a cusp of change. We don't know if it's coming this year, next year, in the next couple of years, but it's going to come soon. Something, and I think definitely the next 5 years. And we see that what has happened every time this country has gotten to that catalyst point, the violence that has come with it. And so I say that to say, Black people, like we know in this country, whenever there has been acts of liberation, there has been our blood, right? There has been blood, and I think there are ways that we can learn going forward, how to protect ourselves, how to keep ourselves safe, looking at the tactics. Many of the same ones they're using. They haven't really changed it. They've just kind of, refreshed it, rebranded it, but their same tactics they're using for oppression. And I think it is going to look different, right? And we're seeing it look different. But the Black Power movements of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and into the 70s are ones I think we look to and remember, and that they were interfaith. They were spiritual. There were women, Black women, leading some of those movements. Maybe not pushed to the front as we know, but we were there, right? We were jailed, we were killed. We had to leave this country, right, for our own safety. Rest in peace, Mama Asada. So I think those we have to kind of look to that past and remember they're with us. Like it's not like it's foreign to us, right? All of that fight and resistance has been transferred down in our blood and our DNA.
Okay, thank you, sister. And I'm gonna venture a try, Sister Nikia.
It was close. It's a hard C though. It's Nakaya, like Nick and Mariah.
Nikaya. Okay.
Babies and pacifiers.
Yes.
Um, I think what I would say here is that one of the things we have to remember, like we've learned this from past Black political movements, whether it's the civil rights movements, Black power movements, radical movements, land back movements, etc., is that policy, like building policy, only works if you're building power at the same time because they will change the goalposts. They're going to write another policy to cancel out your policy. You think you got your policy, then they fool with the implementation. Okay, the implementation right. Okay, well, now we change this metric. Now the oversight has changed. Now we got this other law. So if you're not building power alongside building the policy, you will not be able to sustain and maintain what you've built. You won't be able to hold the folks accountable who are legislating and activating and implementing the policy and funding the policy. And they'll play in your face with your policy. They'll take your policy and turn it into an L, right? Um, and so making sure that we're building power, but also sustainable infrastructure and sustainable leadership. Because again, like the state will continue to move the goalposts. They will continue to play word games. They will continue, like Sister Jamila said with the 13th Amendment. You thought it was a win, but it's really a L. They've just changed the game, right? And so making sure that we're building power, making sure that we're building political analysis among the collective so that when the goalposts change, we can see it, we can spot it from a mile away and say, oh, this is what they're doing. We've seen it before. We know what that is. I know what that slight language change in that piece of legislation, I know what that means and I know what the impact is. And we've built enough power so that we can hold folks accountable when they do that work. And so that we can make electeds as uncomfortable as we are. In my budget work in DC, we one of the things we did last week was a wake up at the mayor's house at 6 a.m. And the premise there was if we're not comfortable, you can't be comfortable. I'm not comfortable with my neighbors dying unhoused. You going to
Mm,
sleep like it's cool. Why? If
mm,
we can't be comfortable, you can't be comfortable, right? But we can only make sure that our electeds are uncomfortable with oppressing us if we've built power, right? And so
mhm.
building a policy without building the power behind it, it's not sustainable. And sometimes we find ourselves just like, running in circles. The same thing that happened with like the reparations fight here in DC, right? If we
Right.
build the right power and collective analysis around what we're trying to build with the policy and how it should be implemented,
Mhm, mhm,
the state gonna play every time, right? The colonial machine and colonial logics are still here. And so if we don't build the
mm,
power to undermine the colonial logic, the imperial logic, the white supremacists and it's not even white supremacy, it's white hegemony. There's nothing supreme about whiteness, but the white hegemony of it
mhm,
all, if we're not building
mhm,
power, we can't counteract any of those things.
mm. Thank you. Thank you, sister. And so I appreciate what's been said. And if I understood it correctly, Sister Monica talked about the fact that one of the things that we can learn from the past and past Black political movements is the need for persistence, because there's going to be, up and downs. And our sister Jamila said, well, in addition to that, we also got to be really conscious and aware when we look at past Black political movements of the need for protection. You know, that while we may get gains, you got to be able to protect them and protect ourselves from the reaction to it. And finally, Sister Nakaya talked about, accountability. We're going to build this power, and okay. Thank you each one of. I want to thank each one of the panelists for providing that insight from the what do you call it? The overview, the bird's eye level, the big questions. But one of the things that we want to talk about policy, which is a high level topic, and usually people approach it from a high level, but we want to bring it down to community development. You know, um, and when I talk to young people, many young people, some of them are frustrated with the political process. And that's not new, but unfortunately, it still exists. People say, "Well, I don't vote." you know People going to do what they want to do anyway, or what's the use? That's really challenging. And I wanted to say to Sister Jamila that she gave me an opening to say that here in the U.S., in North America, there were two civil wars. The first civil war was between the citizens of Britain and the British colonists here in North America, where the colonists fought the British government. The second Civil War were the citizens of the U.S. and the citizens that lived in the Confederacy that fought the national government. The difference between the first Civil War and the second Civil War is that in the first Civil War, the enslavers won. And so that is something that legacy continues to be part of the challenge that we face. So with with that as a setting, to have this discussion about community development and how do we like make policy relevant, effective, and a tool for our communities. How can public policy better address racial wealth gaps and economic inequality? That's not the only thing, but it's a major thing in our community, particularly when we talk about community development. So I'm going to go the opposite direction now and call on Sister Nakaya to lead us off.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. How can public policy better address racial wealth gaps and economic
Absolutely.
inequality?
Yep. I think one of the primary ways is reparations. If we can get that land back, the money back, all the things, like we need a serious land back movement, also a serious reparations movement, as like the baseline. Like that should be the base demand of like all movement formations, all folks who are in policy baseline, we need repair, right? Because the system that we have now was built on theft and extraction. So I think that that is an important starting point. Um, I think other things that we should be building towards in terms of public policy is decommodification. So commodification is the phenomenon, concept, framework of turning things that people need into commodities. Commodities are things that you buy and sell, like toothpaste, toilet paper, a cell phone, right? I once got into a debate with Ann Coulter when I was in college because she made a comparison between purchasing cell phones and the fact that like the price of cell phones is going to go up to health insurance. And I was like, one of these things is it should be a commodity and one of them should not. It's a human right. Like I should have access to health. That shouldn't be a commodity. I should not have to work for it. I shouldn't have to make a certain wage for it. It's the same with housing. Housing shouldn't be a commodity. As a human being, I need shelter. We know that. As a human being, I need water. Now the corporations have started to commodify water. They haven't gotten to air yet, but once they figure out, they're gonna have air for sale, right? And actually, if you think about it, those of us who are systemically oppressed, marginalized, working poor, not working poor, are more likely to be in contaminated environments.
Hmm.
People who have wealth. So I teach part-time at UC Santa Barbara, so I'm back and forth. Santa Barbara, the air quality is so much different than DC. I just breathe better here, right? So actually
Hmm.
they have started to commodify clean air. That should
Hmm.
not be something that's bought and sold. Housing shouldn't be something that's bought and sold. A Gucci bag, sure. That's a commodity. We don't need that, right? But public
Hmm.
policy initiatives that move towards social housing, because we should be able to have houses as human beings. We should be able to have food as human beings. As a human, I shouldn't have access to better or worse food because of my salary. I should be able to eat well regardless. And so those are the 2 points I would really emphasize. One, reparations, and two, decommodification. We should as a society be funding and investing in everybody's ability to eat. That's what our tax dollars should be going towards. And I guess I'll add tax justice, right? The tax system is set up to consolidate wealth among white people. And it just is what it is. There's a phenomenal book called The Whiteness of Wealth, 1010 recommend. The author, Dorothy Brown, we had her come do a teach-in at Fair Budget 2 years ago about how the tax system is intentionally designed to preserve wealth with white people and white corporations and intentionally designed to extract wealth from Black folks and brown folks, right? When we do tax policy right, however, what it means is that folks who have the means are paying into a pot, a collective pot, to make sure everybody get what they need. That's how we should be doing resource allocation. That's how we make sure we can decommodify. Part of decommodification also looks like controlling the market. Landlords shouldn't be able to charge whatever they want for rent. It is the housing
Hmm.
market is literally killing people right now, right?
Hmm.
And so if we don't decide as a collective and like from the state down and bottom up that you can't just charge what you want for rent just because it's a quote luxury condo that you threw together, folks need to, we need shelter, we need water, we need air, we need food, right? So reparations, decommodification, and equitable tax policy for the sake of redistributing wealth. Often folks talk about tax policy and they're like, well, we need taxes to fund this initiative. Nah, we need tax policy, just tax policy, because I need some of that wealth back from white folks who have stolen it. Regardless of whether it's going to a specific initiative, whatever, I need some of that back, period. That has to be redistributed. Even if there is an initiative to point to, redistribute them funds, right? And that happens through taxes.
Okay. Okay. And I want to, if needed, give you just a couple more minutes because uh, this is I want to try and focus the discussion around practical things that people can take away from this discussion and kind of look at applying. So yes, yes, those are the policies that you suggested are important. How do we, how do we get how do we get better policies to address those kind of issues? You know, we need to get them, but I mean, how do we, how do we do that? What for moving from hyper capitalism to even I'll just say soft or semi socialist kind of or social health,
Yeah.
socialized kind of existence.
Yeah. Um, I think two actionable, practical things. One, join a coalition or formation. Don't be trying to figure this out on your own.
Okay.
Find some colleagues, some comrades, some neighbors, somebody.
Mm,
But policy is not done well in a silo.
Hmm.
Okay. And policy also isn't one in a silo. You can have the best policy idea. If you don't have 5, 10, 15, 20 people ready to throw down about that policy, no one's going
Yeah.
to listen to you, right?
Mm.
Your elected official is going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, next. They're going to hear you at that hearing, and they're not going to do anything until they get multiple phone calls about it, multiple emails, and multiple one-pagers, right? So find your crew. If there isn't a crew, build one. But as somebody who has done policy both within coalitions and outside of coalitions, coalitions really answer. Find a crew, build a crew, something. One.
Okay.
Two, on the decommodification tip, there are multiple initiatives that already exist. So the Green New Deal already exists, right? The Green New Deal is a policy package that has been proposed. So the original New Deal, Roosevelt, way back in the day, was a
30s.
socialist package that was really pushing for decommodification, redistribution of wealth, and building infrastructure so that communities could have what they need, right? So that workers have what they need, so that folks, when they retire, have what they need, so that folks have access to healthcare, Medicaid. A lot of those things grew out of the original New Deal. Okay. The Green New Deal has taken some of those concepts but revamped it so it focuses on social housing and how do we fund that and how do we build out social housing. And social housing is a concept that says, like, as a society we should have housing that neighbors can afford, whether they're working or not, whether you make minimum wage or not, whether you're wealthy, whether you got 4, 5 kids, 6, 7 kids, whether you retire, whatever, you should be able to afford housing. And as a society, we should be able to make sure that you have housing, right? And so it advocates for things like multi-unit buildings, where some of the buildings, like, are the way that we define poverty is a little weird, but, like, extremely low income, no income, middle income, high income, all living in like the same building. One, so that we're not segregating folks, because we like to do that. We like to throw the poors over here, brokies over here. But it really says, like, actually, as a society, we should be integrated and we should be together, but also we should be intentional about making sure that all of our neighbors can get some. And so things
Mm.
like the Green New Deal, I know Janice Lewis George has been a proponent of that legislation in DC. There's a Green New Deal coalition. There's also a Center for Social Housing in DC that is working on social housing development, but also the banking infrastructure that needs to happen to make sure that happens. We don't have a people's bank. All of our banks have been co-opted, and not all of them, but a good amount of our banking infrastructure has been co-opted and captured by elites. Um,
Okay.
so I would say, yeah, look into those places, join a coalition, find your friends
Okay.
and your homies.
Organize. Organize.
Organize. That's right. That's
All
right.
right. Sister Jamila, how can tax policy better address racial wealth gaps and economic inequality?
I am going to say Nakaya really hit almost every head on the point when it comes to tax policy. We know that, right? 80% of the country is in the bottom percentile, a bottom 90 percentile when it comes to economics. 20% is in the upper 10 owns the country. And within that 20%, there's even smaller few. So we're in a social hierarchy, right? A
Mm-hmm.
socialized, racialized hierarchy. And unfortunately, that's based on identities, right? Your race, your gender, sexual orientation, religion, so many more. And we have dominant and subdominant. And I think one of what Nakai is saying is exactly correct. And I think one of the things that we need to that we have the opportunity to do is to get the people to support it, right? Oftentimes, anytime we talk about tax, it's confusing. People don't like taxes. They don't talk about the government. All of this stuff is like, oh no, tax is bad. This, that. It's like you kind of get this reaction that's very strong. And I'm talking about with the average person, but really being able to break down that barrier and break down the stigma and help people understand, right? What taxes are for, what they are not for,
Mm.
and looking at what's happening. I won't get into some of the nitty gritty tax things, but I will say I think we need to look at the role that taxes are used to hide wealth from corporations and hide wealth from really rich people. I do not understand in a country that has so much philanthropy why only 5% is required by law to kind of give out every year when it's kind of putting this huge emphasis on philanthropy and on charity, right, to help people get access to their basic needs instead of it being like Nakia mentioned, we all know it's a human right, so we should have it as a right. It's nothing we need to do to earn it or unearn it. And so things like why is philanthropy only doing 5%? How about we see that double to 90%? I mean, double to 10%, 10% of your giving, and see how that's going to go. Look at what gets a write off, what doesn't get a write off. Like when we get into like those nitty gritty things, like Nakaya
Right.
said, certain things that benefit white wealthier people, you get to write off, while the benefits to everyone else, you don't. And so without that education as coalition building and holding folks to it, I don't think we're going to see the change that we want to see. We're using the tax system as a vehicle. I will say, just in kind of closing, the way we use our labor and the way we use our land are the two telling issues, right, of a country, and I think a culture and the people where you are. If you look at, when I say land, I mean natural resources to expand it, but how we use our labor, how we use our land. And in this country, it is unfortunately extractive. And if we just keep up this system, we're going to see the same results. Even with some minor reforms, we're going to see the same results at a massive scale. So,
Okay. Okay, sister. Thank you. Thank you. Finally, Monica, we're going to ask you the same question. And after we have this question, I'm going to change the format a little bit and just ask each uh, panelist a separate question, providing opportunity for other people to chime in, so we can move through some of this before our time is up. Because it gets good quick. So the question to you, Monica, is how can public policy better address the area that you love and have worked in so much, racial wealth gaps and economic inequality?
Yes, so I'm so glad to first I just want to acknowledge my co-panelists. Those were really wonderful responses. And I think they're hitting on all the right notes and in terms of like promising practices, innovative things, things to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And so, sometimes you can't go deep on everything on this call, but I hope what we can do is like plant some seeds and some concepts and some follow-ups. So that's part of what I'm putting in the chat is I work on a project called The People's Practice, and it's focused on anti-racist community development. So, our definition of community development is pretty broad. It includes the financing agencies, the CDCs, media, research, movement building, nonprofits. Like it's a wide ranging sector, people who want their communities to thrive. And so we call a definition of what is status quo community development, and then what is anti-racist community development. And we want there to be a shift, a paradigm shift. And so why I'm putting that out there is our work and our resources and tools. If you go to the website, you'll see a quarterly magazine. We're featuring different people who are practitioners all across the country doing innovative things, doing social housing, doing land back. Like they're from different states, different places, but they might have community investment trusts or, just whatever they're working on health and healing, the intersection of many different topics and community development. And so I just wanted people to have a place they can go for a bit more, a deeper dive, and a community if they wanted. But to address your point, what came up for me was in the first one about racial policies that better address racial wealth gaps. So the ones that have come up in my work over time, one popular one is being put out by Derek Hamilton out of the New School, and it's baby bonds. And he's done like legislation with Cory Booker and things like that. But basically, the concept is basically a child savings account at birth, and that all Americans the children would be funded with an account. And that the idea is that you would make it progressive so that people who are from, for example, communities that are low income or, communities who have been like wealth has not been able to grow, throughout the years for whatever reason, and particularly the historical harms, but would get more, taking into consideration. So that would be like a strategy to help close the racial wealth divide by pushing for legislation that promotes baby bonds or child savings accounts, guaranteed income. They have a whole, units and things on like mayors for guaranteed income, springboard for opportunities. Aisha Nyandaro has a wonderful program out of Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, with mothers getting guaranteed income, like getting installments of funds. They have one in Grow Fund here in, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, I should have said. My organization is in Cleveland, Ohio, but I'm in Atlanta. So Grow Fund, for example, is a pilot they've been doing for Black mothers or Black women in Georgia to get guaranteed income. They have universal basic employment. You have reparations, as was mentioned. You have student loan forgiveness. So there's many things you can do and push for and levers in the policy field involving economics. And I love those points about the tax policy and Dorothy Brown. Regarding the tax policy, I used to work at the Maryland Cash Campaign, well, it was Baltimore Cash Campaign at the time. But for those in the DC area, if you don't know them or not, but it's a nonprofit that was doing a lot of EITC work, so earned income tax credit work. And there's so much you can do in that space because, they might be working with like low income working families, but giving them the EITC, giving them the child tax credit, doing the free tax prep, pushing for bigger amounts, as well as lifting certain barriers and problems, like making it refundable. So there's all kinds of, you could do a state EITC if you're a state that doesn't have, like you can say the federal EITC, but then you can have a state level or local EITC. So there's many like little tax levers that you can do. And we all saw like the fact that they expanded the child tax credit during COVID and lifted so many children out of poverty, with one swipe of the pen. And that's what's so frustrating is like, that it's possible, but there has to be the political will. So you're watching these things play out and you're like, you could give people universal employment, like funds, like the way they did for the unemployment insurance during COVID, right? It's possible. The funds are there. If you can fund wars, you can fund these things, but it's like, anyway. So I'm just saying that there are many different, very interesting things happening in both the racial wealth gap space and tax policy that are just like tangible and concrete and not just, like, like some people, are scared or nervous about taxes. But even thinking, for example, like the fact that the mortgage interest deduction as a policy limits a lot of people who are not homeowners. But they were like, well, you can have a corresponding renter's tax credit, for people who are renters. And so things like that, pushing for things like that, mobilizing, organizing, there's a lot of room for action.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Each of you are, in your response, setting off a firework of brain synapses and ideas and questions and reflections. It's and I got involved deeply in the community development movement back in the early 90s up into the early aughts. And things have changed. Things within the arena have changed some, but the need for the work has remained the same. So we're going to continue ahead and ask a few more questions. And of course, because everything is related, everything is intersectional. We look at we take a systemic approach to our work. So it ends up touching on on everything. I'm going to ask each of you a question, and then if there's any either clarification, amplification that the other panelists want to do, I'll give them the opportunity before moving on. But I am going to ask you, Sister Jamila, the next question, and that is, what policies are needed to support Black entrepreneurship, cooperatives, and businesses? And, what does that mean in a capitalist society?
Thank you. That's a huge question as well. These are some big old questions. I like it. Ambitious, right? So let me try to break it down. So it's this book, since we're talking about a book. He's actually another professor at Morgan. Professor Jared, is it Paul or Bell? I have it in my, I always miss his last name. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nakia.
But I like, I mix what I like.
Yeah. And he has a book on the myth of the Black purchasing power, which talks about the myth of Black banks being the tool to develop Black communities and kind of Black businesses being in a capitalistic system that will decrease the wealth gap, right? And one of the things, and it's hard to say as a Black business owner and someone who supports a lot of Black businesses, it does almost feel hard to say it, like, and to say it out loud. But I think we actually have to say the stuff that we shouldn't say out loud, at least amongst each other, to really understand how wealth works in this country, how it's generated, how it's being used, how it's being hoarded, and all these things, and how we can, what we need to do to enable our Black banks, our Black businesses to be able to have that transformational power to really develop the community in ways that will increase income, that will generate wealth, that will generate jobs and stuff like that. Just like unfortunately many Black people, we have been, stripped of our wealth opportunities, so have Black businesses, right? And looking at how many folks can be employed, like in DC, the average Black business does not have but one employee, and that's the business owner, right? And um, that's not an anomaly. That's the story in many communities. And so for Black businesses to be a tool to drive community wealth, right, and to create jobs so that other people can have that access also, and not kind of in an individualized system. It's not like, that one person is banking. Most of our Black businesses actually aren't even breaking even, yet alone making a profit or grossing more than $1 million a year, right? And so I would say that the focus of the work that I do is on solidarity economics. It is on community wealth building, cooperative economics, setting up cooperatives, community development corporations, and ways to look how we can bring our money collectively in order for it to be spread around, right? And so I think there's been in DC under the Mayor for Life, Mayor Marion Barry, there was a lot of investments into cooperative economics. And that has really, really changed almost completely. DC used to house some of the highest numbers of cooperatives in the country, Black cooperatives, of course, because of the large Black population. And it's gotten away from that. So there are policies that can happen at the local level. There's some policies that are up at the DC council level right now that one of the council members has introduced to make it easier for people to think about cooperative businesses. One of my brothers up in Baltimore, shout out to Taji, we were on a panel last year. He told us about an initiative, I think it's in Massachusetts, where they're trying to do something like TOPA, but for business owners, where if a business owner is about to retire or sell the businesses, that the employees have first right of purchase, first right of refusal, right? Thinking about ways that we can use something, right, and different tools that we can use to make things more cooperative, more communal, decommodify, like Nikaya said, our amenities. I think that's the opportunity we should go. And we are African people, we're Black people. This is not native to us, right? Capitalism, all this shit, it's not native to us, right? I think, and we know what's native to us, and that's one of the reasons we have survived and thrived, right? Quite frankly. And so remembering like what's native to us and tapping into that system. Because if we're going to be a part of the capitalist system, then we have to uphold the inequities of capitalism to be a part of that system, right? And most of us have nowhere near the amount of capital even needed to be in a capitalist system, even if we wanted to be a Black business or we are a Black business. You are still not in the capitalist system. You're a pawn or something in that. And so that's where I would focus attention. I think the first right, TOPA, for business owners is amazing. I think, when there are opportunities for government to do business development, small business assistance and grants and stuff, open it up to cooperatives. Actually, for localities to recognize cooperatives as a legal structure. So you don't have to be an LLC or S Corp or all of these different things, but you actually are recognized at the same legal structure that federal cooperatives have. So I definitely think there is some of the lower hanging fruit. And I think, like anything, it starts with people power, and it's going to start with that consciousness building and having people to understand. Because right now in DC, I don't know if we're allowed to. Oh, I'll just do it, whatever. So DC, there's election happening right now, and one of the things that's so interesting, right, that's happening is that we have a democratic socialist who is a self-proclaimed democratic socialist who's running for mayor, and then a progressive democratic. So you have a democratic socialist and a progressive democratic, both self-claimed. I'm not checking who's who, whatever. These are self-claimed, right? And it's so interesting when we talk about economics to hear the discourse online, primarily, not so much in the community, about democratic socialism or socialism at all in the Black community, and seeing other Black people who advocate for racial justice, who advocate for economic justice against socialism, right? And it's just so interesting to see this dynamic that's being played out with two candidates who, by far compared to the rest of the country, are extremely progressive by, when we compare outside of like DC. But to like have socialism and social housing and healthcare for everyone and access to universal basic income and clean water so we can drink, these are seen as radical. Don't do it. New York's doing that. They're not able, it's just seeing that dynamic is playing out in real time in DC. And it's very interesting. Thank you, Monica, for putting that book in the chat. It's very interesting. And at the same time, it opens up an opportunity for consciousness, right? Because now when I'm in the community hearing people are asking, what is socialism? Well, I'm a capitalist. And I have to be like, baby, you're not a capitalist. As you wouldn't live on the South Side with me. You're not. You just, I'm sorry. Like, break the bubble. That's like white people, poor white people, rural white people. You're not being part of us. You're really not part of that 10%. You're not part of that supreme, right? Break that bubble, right? And so like breaking down these kind of myths and lies and like having people to understand like the US has never really intentionally tried to include all residents, citizens, whatever word we want to use, into this American project, right? Because the Marshall Plan, the New Green Deal, some of the even going back to Woodrow Wilson's time in office, they excluded Black people, white women, and other people intentionally to keep up the social hierarchy. And so I think there's an opportunity to elevate and raise consciousness, and there is a lot to overcome to get there for people thinking like, oh no, just handouts. This is handouts. This is handouts. This is handouts, and not realizing, well, you know who gets the biggest fucking handouts actually? You know who gets Medicaid? What is that? That NFL player, Brett Favre, whatever his name, stole $7 million in Medicaid fraud down in Mississippi. Like, you know who actually is getting, right? Allegedly, right? We're alive. Allegedly, right? Accused. Like, who's actually getting corporate welfare and handouts, and who's getting charity, right, at your expense? And so that consciousness, right, in that misinformation campaign is huge, right, to overcome. And we know education is a powerful tool. That's why they're attacking it. They always have been, right? They've always have attacked it because once you're woke, and once you know, you have just two options: do something or do nothing, right? So.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to go to the next question. And the next question is, what role should housing policy play in advancing Black community development and ownership? And back in the, probably in the late 80s, all the way up into the mid 90s, there was a major discussion in community development about asset ownership, asset-based development, and that kind of stuff. And in this society, housing has often been the cornerstone of much of that. So I am going to turn to Sister Nakaya and ask her to respond to the question, what is the role of housing in community development? What should it be? What can?
I'm looking at the questions and wondering if I can pass this one to Sister Monica and I take the next one
That's
because
fine. Yeah,
her work
if Sister Monica's okay with it, then I'm okay. Sister
Is that
Monica?
okay with you?
No, I'm happy to take it. Housing is
Okay.
not exactly my specialty, but I will say I can touch on it. So what I mean
Okay.
is, housing is a big part of community development. It was so
Yes.
funny when I got into this work that I'm doing now. I had actually come from more of like community development credit unions and things like that.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I was like, oh, some people call it sticks and bricks, this idea of
Right.
building housing and like gentrification and revitalization and all that. But
Mm,
there's many different things within housing, right? And so, of course, there's like affordable housing, but there's also things like community land trusts that people can
right.
put in place in terms of policy. CCP, the Center for Community Progress, has a Reclaiming Vacant Properties program and conference, and they have a
Mm.
CLT conference as well. So they're a great organization. I would recommend them to, check.
And CLT, you're in the industry, so you use the acronyms, but
Community land trusts.
go
So
slow for us.
yeah, reclaiming vacant properties and community land trusts. And one thing I did learn from them during a session that they had was about code enforcement, so how it's used in like a punitive way to get fines and fees. How there's a lot of victim blaming, like blame the victim or like kind of problematizing the residents, right? If you're living in housing, so maybe it's owned or rented, and then the house kind of looks like in disrepair, decline, and so the city or whomever, goes out there with their code enforcers. And so what you're doing is, and so what they were saying and encouraging was something called like code encouragement, or speaking to the residents saying, are there some like housing repair programs that you need to be connected with, stuff like that, rather than
Yeah.
hitting them with fees, especially when you're dealing with low income people. It's like,
Mm.
it's how are you how are you tackling this problem in a very punitive way versus like we're trying to solve a problem. We want, to make the community better, and just even asking them like, well, what do you need? Do you need some help? Do you need somebody to like mow the lawn? Like, do you need a roof repair? Like, and for some people, the exterior is not their priority when they're dealing with like getting food on the table or keeping the electricity on. So it's like that to me, that might be a lesser problem to some people. And so I would just also say that, I'm watching some work happen in Minneapolis right now. It involves some of the stuff happening with ICE, but I think they would have done it anyway. But like eviction moratoriums, things like that, you can put in terms
Mm.
of housing. Um, and I have also found there's really fascinating stuff involving race, particularly around appraisal bias. So just understanding what is happening with that, who are appraisers, how are they being trained, are there enough Black appraisers, different housing being, same house, but being, appraised differently. And I saw a really fascinating presentation in Chicago last year. The conference was neighborhood economics, but the person doing I'll try to put it in the chat, but the person giving the presentation was actually doing uh, tax assessment, research.
Mm.
Really
Mhm.
impressive, cool visualizations showing
Yeah.
that how in some Black areas their property is being taxed at these like astronomically like different rates. So again, it's like, why is the white area with the wealthier house being taxed at a lower rate? And is that intentional, or is there racism behind it, or are there some like policies or programs and things like that behind it? And so just even, and the University of Chicago has done some research on it, and they're saying it's not necessarily that the tax assessor is racist, but they're definitely using like biased formulas. So we're not even going into like lending and like how AI is coming into play. And if you're like feeding bad data into these systems, how is that going to harm Black communities? There are possible, probably real implications. And so groups like National Fair Housing Alliance has a lot of information about AI lately because they're trying to keep an eye on it. Again, the harms, like the people often harmed or taken advantage of in these like predatory situations are sometimes people of color, Black people, people of modest means. So I'll definitely get the
Mhm.
information to you. But those are some of the things that came to mind as in terms of housing policy and levers and things like that that people could push on.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Nikaya, your question, which is the next one in our list, and that is how do we, this issue of criminalization of our community. And while several years ago I had raised the issue when talking about we can't uh, uh, talk about mass deportation without acknowledging and including mass incarceration. So, what about public policy can happen? What do we need in order to address that issue in our community?
Yeah, I'm going to start with something that may not sound like a starting point, but it actually should be a starting point, which is abolition. Okay. There is no reform that we can do to this quote criminal justice system that is going to make it right. That's like trying to reform slavery. You can't reform it. It's just wrong. It's just wrong as hell. You can't reform that, right? It's like trying to reform colonization. You can't reform that. You just got to stop it. You got to stop colonizing. So the same thing here. There is no reform to criminal justice. It's not even a criminal justice system. We have to, one, understand that folks who are kidnapped by the state and incarcerated by the state are victims of torture and kidnapping, are being human trafficked. Like this is trafficking. One of the things that Jamila named earlier is the 13th Amendment says that you cannot be enslaved unless you are convicted of a crime. there is a whole industry, a private prison industry that exists to convict people for the sake of getting free labor. One of the things that I learned recently, which was terrifying, I have a parent who is in a federal prison, and this man has picked oranges for free. He used to pick oranges when he was incarcerated in California. If you catch a Fed bid in DC, they can send you anywhere in the country. Fun fact, unfun fact. He had peers when he was in California who were fighting fires for a couple cents an hour. That is the purpose of the modern prison industrial complex and the mass incarceration complex. One is to um, get rid of dissent against the state. So we saw like the rise in mass incarceration after the Black Power movement. That's not on accident. The rise of surveillance after the Black Power movement. That's not on accident. Um, the rise in capitalism along the same times, right? The concentration of extreme concentration of wealth at the same time that we're seeing mass incarceration. Um, we're also one of the things I learned recently is that y'all know how they have like these automatic driving cars that like have the cameras that spin across the top, and it's like the car is driving itself. Actually, there are folks who are incarcerated who are driving many of those cars, like a video game. Yeah, the car isn't driving itself. There's a driver, and they receive demerits if something happens to the car, like if there's an accident or there's a parking incident, something like that, right? And so that there's no way to reform that any more than there's a way to reform like imperialism, right? And so in order for Black folks to be able to thrive, we have to understand that folks who are captured by the state are prisoners of war. And when we think about victims, we also have to think about the fact that folks who are captured by the state are subject to torture. People make these jokes like, oh, don't drop the soap. That means we know that folks who are in prison are being subject to sexual abuse. We know this. We're not saying it out loud. There's a lot of trauma there, but we know this, right? There's no way to reform that. And so my answer begins and ends with abolition. Um, in order for us to be serious about any Black policy agenda, in order for us to be serious about governing ourselves, we have to get serious about abolition. We also have to call for the release of our political prisoners, again, as a baseline. Any movement that's talking about, yeah, Black agenda, Black this, Black that, are we going to talk about the political prisoners? And the Black bourgeoisie will not. The folks who think they're Black capitalists, because as we say, you're not a capitalist, you don't have no capital. Okay. The folks who think they're Black capitalists, the folks who are aspiring to white hegemony, the folks who consider themselves, the Black bourgeoisie, the Jack and Jills of it all, those folks are, the political consciousness around the fact that you are one false move away from being a political prisoner, needs to be among all of us. We're seeing the state like do things like decriminalize marijuana and not freeing the folks who are in prison for marijuana, right? So beginning and ending with abolition, because there's no reform to something that is inherently evil.
And that's a policy position. How do we move that
Yep.
as part of a larger community development,
Yeah,
agenda?
that's right. Some of the ways are through budget, believe it or not. So when we say stop funding surveillance, deflock them cameras. We don't want them flock cameras. Deflock them. Okay. When we say, hey, that there's too much surveillance, too many CCTV cameras in my neighborhood. There was a program in DC about 5 years ago, it was during COVID, where DC was giving away free Ring cameras. And I was telling my neighbors, oh, why would they give you something for free? Why would they give you that for free? Just think about it, right? Just to find out that MPD is tapping those Ring cameras. Yeah, you the feds now, free camera neighbor. You the police, right? And so making sure that we're pushing for divestment from policing. DC's budget cut a lot of our social safety programs this year. And if you think about like a Jenga, everything that you take away from the social safety net is collapsing society, right? So a lot of our social safety net programs in DC have been cut by 50%. The
Okay.
overtime budget for MPD grew by millions of dollars this year. The money's there.
Mhm.
It's not being allocated the right way. And that's just the overtime budget. That's not the overall, but the overall budget has grown significantly. But just
Yeah.
the overtime budget has grown by dozens of millions of dollars. The
Right.
money is there. Okay.
Okay.
It's not being allocated in ways that feed community. It's being allocated in ways that are carceral. So first thing
Yeah.
is making sure that you are part of the budget fight and you're pushing for a divestment from policing, both locally and nationally, because the same way that we're funding over policing and not funding
Hmm.
housing, we're funding
Hmm.
over policing, we're not funding ending food apartheid, we're not funding
Hmm.
community sustaining agriculture, we're not funding the schools. My kids' school
Right.
don't have a nurse. We're not
Mm.
funding the schools, right? The teachers are severely underpaid. We're funding the police. We're also funding the military. We're funding
Yeah.
a war that did nobody ask for right now. And if you think
Right.
your local dollars aren't going there, you're mistaken. As we said
Okay.
earlier, DC pays some of the highest federal taxes. Those federal taxes is going straight to
Hmm.
Israel. Them federal
Okay.
taxes going straight to ICE and Border Patrol. Them federal taxes going
Hmm.
straight to private prisons, right? They're going
Right.
straight to your Congress member having s- six figures, right? And you making minimum wage. And so
Hmm.
following the dollar, getting involved with the budget fight, but also calling for a defund of policing and calling for the eradication of private prisons is really important. Another thing is
Okay.
continuing to advocate for political prisoners and write your local
Yes.
political prisoner a letter. When the last time you wrote me a letter? Okay.
Right.
Send them a letter,
Right.
call for the release of the political prisoners, and make sure you're pushing for defunding.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Um, I am going to put you on the spot, Jamila. Because one of our ancestors, Frantz Fanon, one of our teachers, told us, he said, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, identify their mission in life and fulfill it or betray it. And I think that's an appropriate introduction for this next conversation point, which is, and I combine two different things because they're talking about the same thing, but what role should youth leadership play in shaping Black policy priorities? When we thinking about doing this work, and how does having intergenerational collaboration strengthen our ability to both advocate for and implement policies, or does it?
That's a really good question. And I'll say that every revolution, because for most of history, there has been some type of revolution that's brought about um, transformational change, right? Where there is actually systemic change, things really change, has been led by young people, right? And many young women. I want to just continue to reemphasize the role of women. I want to emphasize the role of queer people who have put their bodies on the line to lead revolutions throughout our history, not just recently. And I think whenever we look at history, young people are usually on the right side of history, right? It's usually young people that's on that right side of history. And so I tell young people, because I do teach adjunct at Morgan State University, um, and I tell young people that you are the revolution. It's not the future. It's not older people like me. It's you all, right? And it's your ideas, it's your energy, it's your courage, and the ability to still dream, right? Adrienne Marbury Brown, she was on this podcast and she said something so powerful. Every semester I have students listen to it, where she says Harriet woke up with a dream that she was free, her people were free. This is after 7 generations of enslavement, 200 plus years. Like, think about something that's happening that long. It makes you think it's natural. It can make us believe that it could never change. But for her to still wake up right there, in Southern Maryland and say, I'm free. Fuck this shit. I am free. And I am going to liberate myself. And then I'm going to come back and get my people, right? Harriet wasn't an older woman when she did that. She was a
Shay.
young woman when she did that. A young woman who had been disabled by racism at the time, who passed out and who had these other things that happened. But her spirituality, my God, right, led her, because she knew what she was doing was freedom. It was freedom or nothing, right? And so I tell young people, Fred Hampton was 19 years old. Dr. Martin Luther King was in his 20s, right? Ella Baker was a young girl. Ida B. Wells was in her teens, lost both of her parents, raising her siblings. Know your history. It has always been young people with some insight and wisdom from our seniors too. So I don't want to say there's not a role. And I think that that's what we need to tap back into. And I don't know that there's a question, because I actually do have to head out at 7:30. So I'm sorry, y'all. I'll have to leave in about 12 minutes. But we don't talk about where those revolutions often got sparked. And many times it was in our places of faith. And before we were allowed to have institutions, it was under the tree somewhere, right? once we got institutions of faith, a lot of that happened in our faith-based institutions. And so I think remembering some of the tools we do have, some of the assets we do have, right? And it has worked. Like we can't do this without spirituality, right? And whether you whatever you believe in, we can't do this without spirituality because we are spirits in a human experience. But we can't cross anything, part any seas without that spirituality, right? And tapping into that supernatural power that we have in us. So I think it's young people, I think it's spirituality, and I think it's unity that we really need to get back to, honestly, to be able to go forward.
Okay. Do either of the other panelists have anything or want to add anything to that? You know, young people, what is their role? How do we get them? Do we need them?
I just want to double down on some of the last pieces that Jamila named. So I'm writing my PhD dissertation right now, and it is focused on the role of Black spirituality and Black contemporary resistance movements. So thank you for lifting that up. One of the things we've gotten away from, like from the colonial encounter up through the civil rights, there is a clear record that we knew that this is spiritual warfare. That we knew you can't fight spiritual warfare. You bring in a knife to a gunfight. You try and fight spiritual warfare with just policy, right? We know that the full self has to be integrated, that we need rites of passage, that we need to be in right relationship with the earth, that we need to be in right relationship with our elders and ancestors, that we need ritual, that we need the call and response, that we need the song, we need the chant, we need the prayer, we need the fast, right? And then something happened, late 70s, early 80s, that moved us away from that. Our movements have suffered since. Now, there is a reason that a lot of us have become unchurched and unmosqued, right? There's good reason for that. The role of the youth right now is to build the new institutions. Okay. There is a reason a lot of us have lost our home in the church. A lot of queer folks have been pushed out of the church, right? Have been pushed out of the mosque. The patriarchy, nom, 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 eating us up. The hierarchical leadership, whooping us down bad. The charismatic leadership, the Black capitalism, all those things are deep in our faith-based institutions. And our job and the mandate for young folks is, one, to be willing to be transformed in service of the movement. Like Mary Hook said, can you be transformed in service of the movement? Right? And two, to build those alternative systems. One, like the alternative economic systems, alternative governance systems, also the alternative systems that are allowing us to anchor our spiritual selves to our revolutionary selves, to anchor our revolutionary fights in spiritual transformation, in land back, in coming into right relationship with the earth. Land back is inherently spiritual. Building community is inherently spiritual. Building rites of passage is inherently spiritual, right? Reparations is spiritual because that's avenging our ancestors. That's an energetic exchange. Some energy was stolen from us, right? Getting that energy back. It's not just political. And so the role of young folks is to imagine a new world. So many of our movements get stuck in either the performance and persuade part, where it's like, I'm gonna have this demonstration to persuade y'all, the institution to do something different, or at most the non-cooperation. So little of our movements move towards actually building the alternative systems, right? And the alternatives infrastructures to make sure that we're not relying on capitalism, that we're not relying on the state, that we're not relying on imperialism, that we're not relying on colonization, that we're not relying on the prison industrial complex, right? So that's what I'll add there. Those alternative institutions and willing to be transformed in service of the movement.
Okay. That's quite inspirational. And Sister Jamila, we see that you have a hard stop. So I want to just take a minute now when we're not up against the clock to thank you for, the contributions you have made and are making here today. And before I move on to the next question, which I'll pose to Sister Monica, how can local governments, nonprofits, and community leaders work together, not at odds, but work together to drive, once we've come up with these ideas about what policies are needed or how they need to change, how can these various elements of civil society come together to work together to drive this community change to fruition?
Yeah. So I'm going to speak from a place of personal experience just in my area, but this local government piece, it's like, it's really amazing. And you can see it happening right now with New York City and Mandami. But when a mayor, for example, has, you know, the floor, they can make pretty significant change. And so I used to work for New York City under the Bloomberg administration, 4.5 years. I worked for the Office of Financial Empowerment. So depending on, which people are in power, there are institutions out there that are set up to help from a municipal perspective, right? So I can only speak it from this lens, and so I'll put an example. But so, for example, there's this group called Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund, or CFE Fund. And so I'll put them in the chat. But basically, they work with mayors all over the country trying to implement and institute all kinds of things that the whole like guaranteed income or free financial counseling, or they do certain things like they might have a bank on program, and mayors kind of often talk to each other and they are inspired by each other. And so what I mean is they would implement a whole program in the city of New York, either through OFE or through another channel because the mayor, dictated it. So universal pre-K or, and again, they're talking and they're comparing and they want to do first in its class, first in its, first of its kind, and also like one up the past person. So you'll also see us stripping sometimes, of past programs because it was the other person's thing. Another program that gets scaled, and there's that like children's savings accounts programs. So the mayor of the city of San Francisco has had for each kid in public school, they set up a savings account for the child. The base money up until 18, and then when they graduate, they have and it's matched. So there's like incentives. So the kids are like reading or doing certain things, they get a little more money, and they all have a savings account. And so that's the San Francisco Children's Savings Account program. But like, so I'm just saying, like, you can take it from that financial perspective, but whatever your issue area is, you probably have a coalition or org that supports and is like mobilized around whether it's clean energy, climate, or whatever your sector is. Public health, for example. They often have their own conferences and meetings and levers, but that CFE fund is one example. And so they're trying to do certain things, and then they're funding for cities. So if you're like trying to pitch an idea to however you communicate, and if you do, like if an org, a nonprofit talks to their city government, they can pitch an idea and be like, why don't we have that? So and so city has that. Like, can we bring that to our city? And you'll see a lot of pilots happening and things like that as well. So sometimes the money is there and you can see really great ideas. Sometimes you have to pull the lever in terms of like private investment funding the pilot, even through the city. And so, for example, New York City had a children's savings account called New York City Kids Rise. And so that program was privately funded. Some millionaire was like, I'm going to put up the money and show that it can be done. And now through the Department of Education, through New York City, it exists and it's like, citywide. So sometimes you have to kind of come at it from different angles and approaches, but um, they often need the nonprofit to be like that trusted partner to kind of amplify and share and how is it going to get done or implement or deploy it. Even if they have a big idea, they often need like the local stakeholders to buy in. But just check it out and see if there's something that, you guys are inspired, or if you have questions, just let me know. But that's a good one out there.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that response. In your last few minutes here, Jamila, could you just share with us your thoughts about accountability? I have a younger brother who lives in Chicago, and he was visiting me recently, and he was telling me, he's like, man, I ain't gonna vote no more because we elected this mayor in Chicago, and he ain't doing what he said he was gonna do. Now, I mean, I'm talking about him just to, but there's a broad sense among many of younger folk when they look at the civil rights movement, they don't see a tradition of success, but they see that, where's the change? What's the use? So please share with us your thoughts regarding accountability. What does accountability look like when elected officials promise policies, equity focused and other policies, and don't or only partially deliver?
Yeah, that's a great question. So personally, one thing I kind of go by is that we actually can only hold ourselves accountable, because accountable is making a decision that recognizes what you did had an impact and that you want to change, right? And so I think remembering that, like, that has to happen at the self level. There can definitely be consequences for actions, right? And in this country, a lot of those consequences are carceral rated, are like negative punishment, punitive, I think is the word, related. And so just remembering that, like, accountability comes from the self, right? But there absolutely can be consequences. And something that Nikaya said earlier, once you get people into positions that can create policies, because the thing about the government is, right, the government is run by people. Society is made up by people. Laws are created by people. Everything is created by man. This is man made, right? This is not biological. This is not spiritual. Yes, we're in a spiritual warfare, absolutely. But the result of it are things that are made by people. So just like people could create these things, people can change it. Somebody had a dream up slavery. Somebody had a dream up white supremacy, that H word that Nikaya said. Some of these English fancy words I don't remember, but somebody had to make all this
Hegemony.
shit up. Hegemony, thank you. Somebody had to make this up, right? And they had to dream it. And so we have to dream of something different and go towards it. But just like Nikaya said, once we get through the door, once we put those in those positions, the only way to keep up and sustain that change, especially because we're gonna need 100 years of that change before it can be at least, foundational, is to organize, and it's to stay involved and to be involved and continue with that power, because it's more of us than it is of them, literally, of those who are actually in power and those who hold the wealth. It's more of us, right, who are in that bottom 80%. And so that's one thing we have to remember, and that in a democracy, um, voting is only one tool. There's so many other tools in a democracy that is used to bring about democracy and to uphold democracy, because we remember our ancestors, they changed laws without being allowed to vote. They
Ashe.
changed
Ashe.
laws without being allowed to vote. Were there any black people? I think there was maybe one black person within the entire federal congressional body during the 60s for the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, right? We changed laws without the right to vote. We brought about American freedom from Britain while being enslaved. And so, like, that's only one tool that can be used. And I think people focus so much on that tool is because they think they want us to think it's the only one tool. So all you have to do is do that and then click clock back out. Go back to sleep. Wake up, election time, go back to sleep, right? And that's not how it works, right? We have to be awoke all the time to make sure whatever progress is sustained, right? And we can see that so clearly with Roe v. Wade, when people went to sleep. And people who follow that issue, who follow women's reproductive rights, have been waving the red flag since before it was ever made into law about, hey, this is not protected. This is not law. This is not a right, right? This is not a right, y'all, right? And I think the other thing we have to do as we think about kind of long-term revolution and change that needs to happen is, so many of our protection of our rights are being relied on in the courts and not in the Constitution and not coming out of Congress, right? You have to sue and allow the judicial body to make a determination if you were discriminated against and not at work, if this really did happen to you, if you can marry, if da da da. So I think we have to look at the ways in which things are happening now to bring about justice. There's so much going into the you have to sue for it, right? And that cost, that's a, very, very expensive and a long process. And it's a small shot, because how many cases does the Supreme Court or even state Supreme Courts actually take up a year? Right. And so remembering, like, the tools that are out there for us to use and try to exhaust them and create new tools, because all these tools are man-made anyway. Right.
Mm.
Um, and when I do think we have people in power who are more aligned with us saying, okay, get rid of the fucking electoral college, point blank, Pam, period, ma'am, thank you, bam, is gone. Term limits on Supreme Court justices, thank you, ma'am, bam, is gone. Expanding the Supreme Court, thank you, bye, I don't care, let's get it done and get it out, because some of these things have been, used to hurt us and oppress us and to keep these hierarchies that we're living in. And so I think those are some of the things just I remind myself of and like think about when we're advocating when we get back about we got a Democratic majority, DC, Puerto Rico, everybody is state. You don't want to be a state, here go your reparations. We are sorry for what we did to you, right?
Mhm.
And so I think we have to think about, I hate to say this, but what does that look like? And we got to dream it to create the strategy to do it. And we already seen the others, they've been creating this strategy for a long time. Remember, a lot of people, those founding fathers, whoever, did not want a democracy. They wanted a constitutional republic. Right. And I think we have to remember that. And even when democracy was voted for at that time, the only people who were citizens were white Christian landowning men.
Mm.
Right. And so we just need to kind of remember that and be part of like the work that we do and the tools that we use. So I know that was a
Mhm.
lot, but yeah.
Yeah, but it was on point. It
Yeah.
was on point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope y'all have a beautiful rest of your week and Monday. Pleasure being here. I hope to connect after to the panelists I haven't met. Thanks,
All
everyone. Thanks,
right.
Amal.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. Sister Monica, accountability. How do we work that in? Okay, we got these ideas. We even got somebody elected.
So the accountability is tricky for me because I feel like sometimes you might want an idea that is like nonpartisan or bipartisan so that it survives a person. You can ask the person to fight for you and be, the one who votes something in and puts something in place. But like I said, with those mayoral changes and every 4 years, it's like
Mhm.
you don't want to be in a position to have to like start from scratch. So think about it. Like, how do you get the idea to have receptivity potentially on both sides of the aisle? It's like
Mm.
that's what the CDFI fund for a long time was working because people could say
Right,
both Republicans and Democrats support this. And so it needs
right.
continued funding. And then it was, meant to help those like marginalized and disinvested communities with the targeted investment areas. So it was doing the thing that we all want or fight for and hope for, like supporting and helping Black businesses and homeowners and stuff. And it had both parties' support. So no matter what, but like now it's being hit hard. And so the CDFI fund has been struggling the past year or so with like funding stalls and things like that. The whole greenhouse gas reduction thing, people had billions of dollars allocated to them, and
Hmm.
the money did not come
Hmm.
down because of
Mm.
administrative change. And so you have to just be careful. It's like, what are you fighting for? Can it be potentially neutral enough? I don't want to say I'm not radical. Like I'm not, you could probably tell maybe I'm not, but the problem is more like moderate or progressive, right? So like sometimes I want things to be race explicit and
Hmm.
race conscious as much as possible. But sometimes I have
Mm.
to fight for a proxy, like low income, because I know a lot of times when you're talking about disparities, low income for me sometimes often does end up being black and brown, right? So like, is it that they will pass something because it's supporting all and low income? In that way, sometimes you have to be targeted that way. And so you pick and choose. But like, I don't know how
Mm.
to address the accountability part, but maybe Nakai has some ideas. So
Well, uh, I want to give Nakaya an opportunity to to tag on to that question if she has comments. But we're going to start wrapping up, so we'll have some time for questions from the participants, the audience, as you might say, because we've been, dropping some gems. And the final question, and I'm going to start with you, Nakai, and you can also mention about accountability if you choose. But what would a truly transformative Black policy agenda for the next 25 years from today until 2051 look like? Go ahead and dream, sister.
I'm a dream.
Come on now.
I am going to say a few words about accountability as I move towards dreaming, though. So, in some degree, I'm gonna give a slight disagreement to what my good sis Jamila said before she left. Because yes, we got to hold ourselves accountable, but also accountability happens in relationship. If I have a relationship with somebody, I can actually hold them accountable. I can say, hey, you said you were committed to doing this thing. I don't see you doing it. Let's talk about it. Right? You have to be in a relationship, have trust, mutual respect for that to happen. And often our elected officials are not in relationship with us. And that's for multiple reasons, right? Um, they may not be from the community they're serving, they may not be invested in a relationship. And so making sure that we're electing folks who are in relationship with community and give us an express commitment to staying in relationship and can tell us measurably and actionably how they're going to be in relationship and what that looks like is super important. All right, boom. And that was my big bold answer on the dreaming and all that. Truly transformative. I think at that point we're looking at the social contract and not just legislative policy, right? And so for us to have a truly transformed experience here as Black folks in this land, one, we have to build the infrastructure for actual self-governance. We're not governing ourselves right now. Somebody else is doing it. Okay. And it's the folks who are getting the handouts and all the things. The corporations are governing us. The duopoly got us down bad. Okay. The oligarchy, we are not self-governing. Okay. In order for us to get to a space of self-governance and self-sustenance, we have to build infrastructure and alternative models to get there. We have to get back to cooperative economics and bartering. We have to get back to building our own institutions. And sometimes it starts small, right? Before we can get out of state-based school, start a Sunday school. Can you do a freedom school? Right? Can you do rites of passages for the kids in your neighborhood? When's the last time you got the 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds together to say this is a transition. Let's prepare you and hold you through that. Okay. But I think a truly transformative agenda looks like a social contract switch where we're naming and being serious about the work of governing ourselves. So many of us are not fighting like we can win the liberation fight because one, we don't think we can win, right? So when you got a bully and you don't think you can win, you're not really going to fight them. You might be like, well, I give them a little bit of my lunch money. Let me stay out their way. I'm not going to go down this hallway. You're not going to fight them like you could win if you don't think you could win. And we're not fighting like we could win right now. Okay. In order for us to actually get to the place where we have won our liberation, we have to get serious about governing ourselves. And we're not. We're not. Right. Because as my good sis said earlier, a lot of us think our civic duty begins and ends with voting.
Yes.
It don't. All that was one action that took you 2 hours out of 365 days. I don't know how many hours because I don't do that type of math. I just do budget math.
Yes.
But we have to get serious about self-governance. We have to get serious about being in right relationship with each other. We don't know our neighbors
Okay.
well enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in
Mm-hmm.
order for us to govern ourselves, we have to, that's the transformation right there. We have to get serious about governance.
Okay.
We have to get serious about land stewardship, about growing
Mm-hmm.
our own food. There was an
Mm-hmm.
ancestor, and I can't, his name is escaping me right now, but you can't walk away until you can make your own shoes. Make
Okay.
our own shoes, we
All
can
right.
walk away, right?
Yeah.
We're not in
Okay.
the business of making
Okay.
our own shoes right now. We're not in the
Mm-hmm.
business of getting leather. We're not fastening it. We ain't no cobblers in the
Mm-hmm.
building, right?
Right. Right.
And we got a problem there. I think some of the incremental ways we get back to that is we have to take vocational education very seriously. They have stripped
Mm-hmm.
the VOTEC from DC. I don't know too many
Mm-hmm.
young men who know how to plumb. Where the plumbers
Mm.
at? Where the folks who do the
Right.
HVAC? Where my carpenters at? Okay, we can't
Yes.
even build our own infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
because we've been sold this black capitalistic, this bourgeoisie thing that says, well, your job is to go to school and get a good government job. Okay, and who finna build the
Yeah.
houses?
Right.
Who gonna grow the
Right.
food? Right? We can't even
Mm-hmm.
feed ourselves. The
Right.
climate that we live in DC and Central California, we could actually have a self-sustaining food, sovereign, community-driven food system. We're not
Mm-hmm.
dead ass serious about that right now, so we can't even feed ourselves.
Right.
And so for me, the transformation looks like us getting very serious about being radically independent from the state, very serious about governing ourselves. There are communities I was in Chicago a few weeks ago. There are neighborhoods there where the police have to ask for permission before they cross the territory. You don't come in here and arrest people.
Mm.
You got to talk to the people before you come in this housing project because we govern.
Mm-hmm.
We have our own safety mechanisms. We have our own
Okay.
protection and self-defense mechanism. We have our own emergency
Mm-hmm.
protocol. If somebody gets injured, we know what to do. We can get them to the
Uh-huh.
hospital. We're not calling 911 in here, right? If we don't take
Okay.
that seriously, we gonna be in the same fix where we are looking for others to govern us, and the folks who we're looking to govern us do not have our best interests at heart. They have their
I
own.
see.
They have consolidating power at heart. They have consolidating wealth. Nobody needs a billion of anything. The fact that
Okay.
the folks who have billions of lots of things or the folks who are
Mm-hmm.
pulling the strings in governance lets us know,
Yeah.
one, that we have a problem, but two, we have to get serious about self-sustenance and self-governance.
Mm. I see. Thank you. Thank you for that. Sister Monica, truly, truly transformative community development in the next 25 years. What does that look like? Look into the future. Share with us what you see.
Yeah, so I am going to share a report in a second, but it's because I think it gets to the heart of like um when we watch like the political outcomes and we're like, well, how did Black women vote? And like how they're on the right side of history a lot of times, right? With what they're doing and how they're moving. And so there is this policy agenda that was put out. It was called Black Women Best. And it was a whole legislative agenda. It was like a 150-page report. But basically, it was all of these levers and touch points where it was like maternal health, Black maternal health, wealth building, taxes, like no matter like whatever you're talking about, like it was like how could you set up the policy that would best lift up and support Black women? And I think for the world to be better and transformative, it's like if you followed that blueprint, that roadmap, then you're fighting for the right things, right? Because it's like double disenfranchisement, right? With the gender and the race and just, no matter like the number of degrees they're getting, they're still like, not being paid equally, all of these injustices, right? And so they were saying like, if you fix these things, it's a whole suite of things. And it's like, you could tell they really put together this really robust package. But there's also one, I'll put out another one, is put out by the Joint Center with Dedrick Asante Muhammad's group right now, and also the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And they also have a Black policy agenda. So, like, I don't think any policy agendas have to be created. The work is in the implementation, right? And also, the biggest transformative thing would be for people to fight for addressing structural racism, right? The root cause, let's get to the root cause of these problems because a lot of what we're proposing are short term and like band-aids and short-term fixes. It's like, is that really gonna like close? There was something, a stat that I heard, and it wasn't, the numbers change, but like, there was like, if you don't do anything about the racial wealth divide, it would take Black people like 400 years to close the racial. And it's like, that's why things like trickle down and letting the time pass and doing nothing and serving all doesn't work. Like, not only do we not have 400 years, but also like you have to fix what caused this massive inequity, right? You need transformative change to fix something that's like going to take 400 years to rectify. It's like something is structurally wrong and you have to fix that. And so until we like get through the big structural change and the big bold policy ideas, that's when you're going to see real change. But I'm not saying you don't do nothing. You still do what you can, and I'm gonna put these blueprints in the thing. But like you got to still put one foot in front of the other. But like even in my work too is also narrative change. So we didn't talk about it, but like in our research, we interviewed like 100 people across the country in community development, and there were 11 dominant narratives. Narratives that just keep 11 dominant negative narratives that keep holding us back and are perpetuating racism. And so one of them is like risk and risk aversion, and like, oh, Black communities are risky. And like, I don't want to fund there. I can't fund it. Like, I'm not going to lose my money. And it affects all the capital things because those like red line communities are deemed risky. But we have to fight that narrative. And the counter narrative is that CDFIs have proven for over 50 plus years or 100 years or whatever, they've been around since like the Clinton years. But like, they've been making the loans that don't default. So they've done the work, proven the case. Like, you just have to get on board, So it's like, I'll just put the links. But transformative change is like everybody wants us, and funders in particular, to do these things 3 to 5 years. And it's going to take longer than that. It's going to take way more investment than that. You can do the private sector, but you also need the federal changes. So there's like, yeah, that's where all.
I think you're muted, Willard.
Willard, you're on mute, friend, but we saw you saying words.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened, but I was saying, Amal, are there any questions in the chat? Are we going to allow the participants?
Yeah, if there's any questions in the chat, feel free to share them, or if you would want to unmute yourself, you can raise your hand, and I can allow you to talk if you want to interact with the panelists. Right now is the time. You can add them in the Q&A and also in the chat as well.
And this would also be a great time for participants to share their experience on any one of these many topics that we've covered.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing the resources in the chat as well, Monica. If there's anyone else who would want to share resources, you can also add them to the chat as well. Yeah, thank you so much, Willard, Nikaya, Monica, and I know Jamila also left. But this was a great conversation, and I learned a lot, definitely, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. And we'll definitely carry these gems that forward as well. I don't see any questions in the chat. If there's another question, maybe you want to do Willard, or we can also see if there's anyone, Monica or Nikaya, if there's any comments, closing comments you would want to make, Willard as well.
Yeah. I'd like to provide an opportunity for Monica and or Nakaya to make any closing comments that they'd like in terms of just wrapping up, thinking and giving folks something, food for thought for about building a policy for the people and for a Black agenda in the 21st century.
I think.
So,
Oh,
come on, sister.
yeah. Only thing I would add that I haven't said is there is a systemic and intentional attack on our ability to imagine. And so a large part of this work is actually tapping into that radical imagination. And for us, the Black radical imagination, because where we are right now is in the need to build a new world. And we're not going to be able to build new systems, build a new world, build a transformed reality if we can't imagine something, imagine beyond reform, imagine beyond capitalism, imagine beyond mass incarceration, and actually imagine the world that we need to build. So I just want to encourage folks to tap into that imagination one time, because we, as Jamila said earlier, every system that we live in, somebody just imagined it and was like, you know what, we should have white landowning folks vote. Yeah, we should have an electoral college. Like, people just be imagining stuff and doing it. We have to get in the practice of imagining things and actually doing it. And part of the reason there is food apartheid and a lot of the other things is so that we cannot imagine and we're just stuck in survival mode. So as a radical practice, I want to encourage folks to tap into the imagining of it all. It is not just for children, and it is not just for whimsy.
Yeah, love that. I mean, there's like a lot I could say. I'm going to try to end on a positive note, but I was like, thinking about, things that other areas of questions. But I guess, this is long-term work and I do believe in it. This is the stage of life I'm in, but I believe in the like NAP ministry and the rest is resistance. And so just take care of yourself. Like if you're in this fight, like some people look at Black people critically and, maybe some of the stuff about like, oh, they didn't do enough with No King's Day or whatever. And it's like, look, look at how we like have to like voting, like, whether you're doing something with the carceral system or abolition work or like, just the climate work and brown fields and stuff. And so every day you're thinking about your community, right? You're thinking, how can I uplift the community, better the community, support the community? And just take care of yourself too while you're at it so you don't burn out and that you can keep doing the fight. I remember they have things like the march continues and things like that at the Equal Justice Center and the museums down in Montgomery. It's just like we're in this leg of the march, right? And so the march continues and like we're doing our part. I do think a lot of what we're doing is the modern day civil rights movement with this work. And that's how I keep in it and keep fighting from my vantage point, doing what I can. But yeah, just trying to stay
Okay.
hopeful and resilient.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll just say in closing that three things. One, the way that this society functions culturally. Culture, I define as technology for living, meaning how you interact with your environment in order to continue your existence. Food, dance, clothing, all of that stuff is culture. And there's our friend Sheikh Anta Diop talked about the two cradle theory, that some civilizations or some communities, some people grew up in a low resource culture, and because of that, then they end up with a scarcity mindset, and European culture basically is low context binary. It's low context, meaning that it segregates, and analysis means that you separate and segregate ideas and even activities. That was the specialization of labor. And that has its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks. So as part of that, we see things like this low context, where within economics, there's this concept called externalities, where it doesn't matter, if you're in an economic relationship, they say, oh, well, the only thing that matters is what happens between you and the other person. The impacts, whether it's pollution, whatever those other impacts are that come from that relationship, those are externalities. They don't count when we, count what's going on. That's sort of what we see with GDP. We also see that in how Europeans talk about things like war, low context. It's, oh, well, we're having this war, and we're trying to do one thing, kill the soldiers. And if other people get killed, we call that collateral damage. It's not part of what we're talking about. So this low context thing spills over even into the way we think about stuff, which is this binary thinking. You can only be one thing. When we talk about politics, well, it's only voting, and politics is only going to the voting booth once each cycle, and once you voted, then there's nothing else to be done. But we find that actually across time, as far back in history as you want to go, and across space, just about anywhere in the world you want to look, with most faith traditions, the highest manifestation of divinity is the creator. So we're most our divine selves when we're being created. But we live in a society that conditions us to be consumers, and that's one of the things that we got to push back on. Even when we talk about policy, people will say, oh, well, I went and like my brother told me, oh, I went and I voted for this guy. And after I voted for him, I sat back to consume what he was going to produce. And I didn't like what he did. It's like, no, you got to be engaged. Part of being creative is to, is reflected even in the Christian tradition. Where if you look at in the Bible, New Testament, Ephesians 6:12, where Paul was talking to that church, and he said, we don't struggle against flesh and blood, but we struggle against powers and principalities. That's that spirit thing, and it allows us to connect in a much broader sense. And finally, my last and my closing thought is that one thing that we got to be really conscious of, and you got to work at it, because we are in this, we've been colonized by the European, and have a tendency to kind of follow that the way that they think about it, But one of the things that we really got to be aware of is this idea about, when people are balkanized into these camps of Democrat and Republican, or conservative and progressive, we got to recognize that, and when we think about it, at the end of the Second Civil War here in the U.S., and the end of the Confederacy, the political party that was most anti people of African descent was the Democratic Party. And now it's the Republican Party. Those are just labels, So part of what we got to recognize is that, we don't have permanent enemies or permanent friends, but permanent interests. And part of the challenge is for us to identify what our interests are so that we can move those policies that promote our interests, whether it's in small ways or large ways. We got to be able to identify our interests. So with that, I'll thank the panelists and also the people who joined to participate with us, and turn it over to Amal so she can tell us what the next series and stuff that's going to be happening through NDCC.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all the panelists, Nikaya, Monica, Jamila, Willard. Thank you so much for doing such an amazing job. We have our upcoming webinar, which is actually on local politics and the national impact on May 18th. And I'm going to go ahead and share the link in the chat in a second. But with that, I really do want to thank you so much, Willard. This conversation was really integral and important, especially with the current political landscape and everything that's going on in this country. I think these conversations are really important and needed, and that's really what NDCC was trying to do. With this conversation, the previous ones we've had, and also in the future as well as we continue our webinar series and our cooperative academy and the work that we continue to do. Thank you so much for supporting us as an organization and the work you do. I know it's a commitment to take out your time and prepare for this. You probably all have a lot of other stuff you could have been doing right now, but thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And with that, thank you so much. We'll be sharing the recording on YouTube. I'll share the link with all the audience and also with the panelists. I'll probably be doing that this week, and you can share that with your networks and everybody as well. And stay connected with NDCC. Thank you so much for supporting this. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.